So here we're going to focus on horror in television in the 1990s. Now, right off the bat, I'm not including Freddy because that's an anthology series. So we're going to deal with, quote, a regular TV series. And these are very odd choices because I think just horror on television was very rare, and with good reason, as we're going to see. So we're going to start off with Eerie, Indiana, truly bizarre pairing of science fiction and horror. Essentially, it's a strange little town, if you want to put it very simply, sort of stuck in the Twilight Zone. You have this main character, a child called Teller, and basically his friend Simon, and they kept having these weird adventures all the time. They meet werewolves and mummies. They're caught up in a JFK conspiracies. They meet like a neo-satanic cult. Like his brother is supposedly a Schwarzenegger. A woman dresses up like the Terminator. This thing is out there. It's just filled with insane number of pop culture references and has a huge Stephen King kind of influence and a little bit of David Lynch as well. So if you know Stranger Things, this is basically the prototype. This is Stranger Things. So it's pretty shocking that Stranger Things is so popular, but this only ran for one season in the early 90s. But it's a well-worn treasure. I don't remember it as well as the other series I'm going to name, but it is really bizarre and very engaging. They even have this weird character called Dash X, who's another kind of child hero protagonist. And I'm not joking, that's his actual name. His actual name is Dash X, and he's this homeless child who helps them out in their various adventures against both these monsters or this weird phenomena that they have to face in these weekly adventures. There's even an episode where the lead actor child discovers he's on a TV show called Eerie, Indiana, and he thinks he's an actor. So, yeah, this thing breaks the fourth wall all the time. It's very knowing about what it's doing. So it has kind of like a Simpsons kind of flair and taste where the characters are kind of self-aware that they're fictional characters. So very interesting. It's not too scary as a horror show, but it is really fun seeing all this homage to old horror films and like previous series. It even has some nods to horror actors as well. And now we turn to American Gothic, which is much more serious and much more brutal in terms of the horror genre. It basically stars a very mysterious kind of southern sheriff, for a lack of a better word, called Lucas Buck. And Lucas has some supernatural powers, but they're never fully shown and they're only by implication. And essentially, he just controls this town of Trinity and manipulates all these people within it. And he's opposed by his kind of unknown son, Caleb, who he tries to corrupt. And Caleb is aided by his sister, who's a ghost called Meryl. And essentially, the episodes go back and forth between Lucas, sometimes for the most part being the villain, but basically being a lesser evil. So, as much as Lucas is this kind of very weird slash demon slash wizard, he's a force for, quote, order. So he's not good, but he does good because he sometimes faces threats which are worse than him. And although we seem to be on the side of Caleb and his sister, our allegiances will shift depending on the episode because sometimes even Meryl will do things that are very questionable and very immoral, and Caleb is sort of forced to ally, at least temporarily, with Buck. And they have a pretty good cast to round out the world, but it's a very small show. They have very limited budget, so we don't see a lot of special effects. We don't see a lot of blood, but there is a lot of great scares. There's a lot of good horror moments, and they happen quite early in the series. But you do have to be patient in terms of how they are building up the stories because, again, how Caleb and Buck are connected is not immediately known, and it's only very slowly that you realize what Buck is up to and what his plans are. And again, you're going to be very twisted about him because he is pretty evil, but he's very charismatic, and he's often very persuasive. So even though he's generally a corruptive force, he sometimes has a good point, and you see why he has a certain method in terms of what he's doing, which is often horrific, but there was a reason behind it. And the same thing with Meryl, because she seems to be a pure force for good and innocence, but then she will do things which are very questionable, and you're going to go back and forth on her whether she's doing more good than harm. And the only one who really stands out as kind of innocent is Caleb, and it's very well acted. Usually child actors are hit or miss, but Caleb is played extraordinarily very well by a child actor, and it's just an incredibly well done job. It's unfortunate that both series only ran for one season, so the good part is you can get through both of them fairly quickly, and the bad part is there's really not much more. There was one additional spin-off series for Eerie, in the late 90s, but that also ran for one season. And it does have a lot of neat little references in both cases to sort of the inner world of horror. And it's really more funny than anything else. For instance, there's one episode where one of Raimi's relatives, because Sam Raimi is the executive producer of Gothic, and his name is Ted Parker, which is, of course, an allusion to Peter Parker. And ironically, Tobey Maguire also shows up. He's in one of the Eerie, Indiana episodes. And finally, James Cotner is the director for some of the Gothic episodes, and he later shows up for Buffy and is the director there as well. So it's a lot of neat little references to other horror programs and other horror, images, and even the Spider-Man series. So it's a very weird mixed batch of horror in this selection. Again, I would say decidedly American Gothic is genuinely dreadful and very scary, whereas Eerie is more just bizarre and strange. It is horror, but more of a David Lynch sense. So quite a gamut here. So I guess if you're a younger person, you're going to get more into Eerie, Indiana. But if you're more adult, then you're going to enjoy American Gothic. So there you have it, a spotlight on horror in television in the early 90s in American television. Thanks for listening.